So in yesterday's vlog, we were exploring a couple of ideas, technology and its impact on miniature wargaming. And we were specifically focusing on Games Workshop because they're one of the biggest miniature companies out there. They have a very, very strong narrative and IP with Warhammer 40,000. And they make absolutely fantastic miniatures of the highest quality. And in that example, we asked the question about 3D printing. This idea that in the past, you had some recasts, you had China Forge, you had non-GW miniatures that you could incorporate into your army, but it took a little bit of effort, and the quality, there was a variety in the quality, and you kind of had to be in the know in order to pursue that channel. Well, now with 3D printing, as it comes on more and more, online more and more, it's very hard to tell the difference. I've seen some 3D printed miniatures side by side. It's impossible to tell visually. And when they're painted and based, there is no way. So in response, Games Workshop banned all 3D miniatures, banned all converted miniatures, and is banning a lot of their older miniature models in their line. It needs to be the current stuff. I understand that because they're a toy company selling these miniatures. If you don't buy from them, the whole house of cards folds. The rules for Warhammer 40,000 and for Age of Sigmar, they're really just an excuse to buy miniatures and push them around on the table. And I like the rules. There's some great narrative. There's some great stuff in it. So this leads into today's question, following up on some comments. I don't have an answer for this. I was really kind of brainstorming, and I'm like, we got to push this up to the channel and get the team on it, because what do you guys think from this perspective? This is really, really uncharted territory, Pandora's box. So Games Workshop, this was my logic, and of course, agree or disagree. Games Workshop initially was a miniature-based company, a model-based company. They'd sold miniatures for their Warhammer Fantasy Battles, for their Rogue Traders / Warhammer 40,000, and early on for other systems, Citadel. Moving forward, they switched to a miniature company selling the miniatures to a toy company, where now they are selling essentially boutique products, very, very unique miniatures set in their narrative. When you're paying $50 for 4 or 5 miniatures, that's pretty excessive. When you're paying $60 for one miniature, that's pretty excessive. What's interesting, if you're into the board gaming aspect of the hobby, I have friends who look at me like I'm nuts for Kingdom Death Monster and the outlay for that. And it's like, wait a second, you play Warhammer 40,000 and you're insane for Kingdom Death Monster prices for miniatures. Those are GW prices, and at least the stuff I buy for KDM is locked in with the rules and is not going to become useless in 6 months. So there's this idea that they're charging a very, very premium price. We can argue whether it's worth it or not. That's another time. Obviously it is, because we enjoy the hobby and we enjoy playing it, but it is a boutique item. Now, what if we get to the point, let's take a step forward beyond just 3D printing. When these files become widely available and 3D printing becomes widely available, to the point maybe like it is mainstream tech right now, but really mainstream tech where you have a very capable 3D printer, or you have generic access through a couple of friends. When that happens, and everyone in theory can print their own models, and those with the tech can get the files and you can print them, that's I don't see GW necessarily coming back from that. I mean, how do they do that? How do they control that? Because we want to control that. They want to control that. As a corporation, you want to control it, you want to strangle it, you want to monetize it, you want to milk it for everything that you can. So this led to the idea, 10 years out, or it might be, I don't think it's like 3 years out, but 5, 8, 10 years out, if everyone has access to a very capable 3D printer and access to the files to make it happen, and we're putting aside ethics and the legal aspects for a moment, although it is very hard to put those aside, because these are people, their livelihood, supporting their family, supporting their friends and responsibilities by being employed by Games Workshop. but we're just kind of looking at this on a purely mathematical level. If those things are available, why would I even remotely go to Games Workshop? Why would I go to eBay? It ripples out. It's not just Games Workshop. You're trolling eBay looking for Blackstone Fortress stuff because you missed the expansions, or you want to get a couple of key pieces for your older army, and you're like, all right, I gotta do the eBay thing. Well, right there, you can now bypass eBay. You can bypass so much. What if Games Workshop shifted from a toy company to an information company? What if the product they sold does not physically exist, and it exists in the narrative IP only? What if you bought your files from Games Workshop? What if they sold it from that perspective? And of course, they'd condition us to pay $60 for a file, where you'd look back and at least I was paying $60 for a couple of pieces of plastic. If they switched to a point entirely digital, could they do that? Would people subscribe to that? Now, you'd have to, there's always going to be people outside of the ecosystem, but you'd have to really make it engaging. I mean, what if they had a Warhammer lifestyle where you paid, and of course it could be different levels, like Patreon, so to speak, set up different levels. But if you logged onto their site and their community, and you had access to the latest miniatures, and you had access to custom miniatures and custom pieces, and that narrative, and be able to download books and to be able to interact, essentially a Warhammer experience that the miniatures are a part of as opposed to the main part, would they be able to make up that revenue? I don't know. That's a lot. I'm just thinking about that. That's a lot. It's a lot of profit when you're selling miniatures for $60 for a group of them, and it costs you 3 cents to print those out, if that. I mean, it's massive profit. I don't know how you replace that. But what happens when these files become widely available, ready to download, and the next generation of miniature wargamers becomes conditioned, as in that's how they grew up. They grew up with these files. They grew up with printing their stuff. They grew up with how that operates in that ecosystem and in that culture. When that switches, that's what they're going to expect. How does GW deal with that? Do they go to an entirely download type system?